Oh, good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining the community hangout for the Dalten Collective. So we got a couple things to go over today. The first and hopefully the easiest one was that as part of my contracting work for Talon, I'm bootstrapping a star group, which is going to be focused on building an economy within Urbit. It's similar to something like a W3C style web consortium model. And I was hoping that Dalten could express interest in joining this group, but I didn't want to just go ahead and speak for the entire group. So that was the first thing on my agenda today, was to get feedback on joining that association, and if that's something we want to do, to go ahead and express interest, and then sort of see where that goes from here. But I can answer any questions anybody has about that particular group, or at least as much as I have in my head so far.
I'm very interested.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm here to serve.
Sounds great.
So what I would say is, what would it entail from our side? Would there be any obligations or anything like that?
Likely not, and especially not at the beginning. So as the group gets started, meaning this star group, the first thing that we'll have to do is create some sort of charter, a reason for being, probably a name, maybe some other basic materials. So there might be some collaboration required in that, so that there's some alignment. But similar to how the W3C breaks itself up into working groups on specific topics, I would imagine this group would do the same thing. So if there's a working group devoted to, let's say, planet markets, for example, that might be something Dalten wants to participate in specifically, but otherwise there wouldn't be any obligations other than the initial feedback and input and possibly writing that would go into the formation of the group.
Right, well, it sounds like things that we want to do anyway. So I think that it sounds like an extremely good idea.
Yeah, cool. And I would also suggest anybody on the call or listening who has a star to also go and express interest. I put out a tweet on my which is at Kenny Rowe on Twitter, but there's also some tweets internally on Urbit under the Urbit community group under business booting, something about businesses. I can't remember exactly what the chat channel is called. But there's a form there you can fill out. So go ahead and express interest there if you want to join as an individual.
I have a semi-relevant question. Since I'm on the Dalten multi-sig, could I get an invite to the star operator chat or group?
Yeah, by proxy, sure. Yeah, and I'm not even totally sure that it should be something as exclusive as you have to own a star. I think that makes sense because we've often thought about stars as businesses, or at least I have. But it would probably be some sort of dues organization, if not, and likely the dues would be something like address space. So in that way, it would lend itself easily for stars to join, and anyone else who wants to accumulate address space to do that. But that might also be a good segue into some of the stuff that you're working on, Sarpin, with regards to bundling planets together too.
I'll have my own stars soon enough.
Yes. Yeah, I think you will. Okay.
So I would, since I'm going to have a star soon, I think I would also appreciate the invite to the star operator group.
Yeah, it hasn't been actually formed yet, so it's all just expressing interest. I honestly didn't know.
The one that's already been going, the star operator.
Oh yeah, that doesn't. That one has been. I think well, I'm sure that probably died when Dobzad sunk. So
I see.
No worries there. The most active current star group is the one run by Minder Folden. So, and you can just ping him directly with, if you want to join that one.
Duly noted.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and just drop in that interest in the interest form, and then I'll keep this group updated on events happening with that star group as well. So cool. So the other thing I had was some feedback that I received in a separate Urbit channel about our meeting from last week, and I just thought it might be interesting to read some of the feedback that was expressed to me specifically, not in a direct channel or a direct message or anything, but I did find it interesting, and that people are finding the things that we're doing interesting enough to comment about it. So I just wanted to basically read this. And this comes from Rivmex Tim Degg. It says, it was a nice conversation from the Dalten meeting, and he had some thoughts that he wanted to, or he or she, I actually don't know, that they wanted to share back with us. One, developing corporate trust and business ethics, corporates, and employee relations. What orgs are already, or what orgs could we look to as an example in this regard? And I didn't have really I didn't have anything off the top of my head that I'm actually trying to model Dalten after, like, very specifically, but I do think it is important to be thinking about organizations that we know of that are running successfully, or at least in a cooperative style, that we could be looking at to try to glean what they've learned and how they're doing things.
Maybe send them the video with Ori.
With Diorg, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, actually, that's actually a good. So Diorg and actually DXDAO, probably those two are the ones that I'm currently most aware of in this sort of same style of organization. So that's a good point, Christian. And of course, difficulty in people relations is never going away, and I think we're all quite aware of that. And he goes into saying about how this is just going to be a continual problem, conflict. So figure out ways of dealing with it in informal and formal manners. Some people are motivated by financial gain, some people by a sense of community, and some by recognitions and titles. How are these different things? Are they all going to be sort of addressed with Dalten, or are we going to focus on some other kinds of incentives? And I thought that was a particularly interesting, because we are in some sense trying to hit on all of these motivators of financial gain and community involvement and recognition for hard work. But unlike maybe a particular company where they're going to be focusing on one, or a social group that's going to be focusing on something of the other, we have just sort of different contexts from which all of these things could come into play. And I don't know whether that is just sort of spreading our resources too thin, or if it's actually a good idea, or if it's somewhat that, a normal practice in any healthy organization. So, but it did seem it's pretty interesting. And then there was a question about inclusion, such that that there's been a lot of inclusion is a big topic in corporates these days. So there's a lot of good material out there. I'm not exactly sure what this person meant by inclusion, but I think as this organization matures, inclusion will be further defined, at least in some sense, of membership, and then inclusion in the sense of it's a permanent membership, but I don't know exactly how that's going to shape up long term exactly, but that's at least where we are currently. And then where do we draw the line between what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior? Who draws this line, and how is it governed? Sort of internal governance mechanisms. And then there's further discussion in the channels about sort of when early groups form in a particular way, they tend to are sort of pointed directionally in the beginning, but then they have their own lives as they grow and mature. And a lot of times the people who were there at the very beginning are not even there longer term if it's a successful organization. And for the most part, I think I agree with that. But in terms of where we are currently, we have some basic clerical procedures in place, meaning the assets that are owned by the group are that's a voting structure. It's a 3 out of 5, and that's a technical matter, meaning our smart contract multi-sig. Other than that, we don't have any formal or really informal governance structures or features. Sort of implicitly, we have an idea of collective ownership in Dalten. That is, I think, should be clear. But in terms of authority, there's really only 2 positions right now that we've defined, which is the management proxy, which is also something technical, and the spawn proxy. So those 2 proxies have some technical authorities, but there are also authorities in and of themselves in the sense of an organizational or some other sort of authority. Yeah, so that's the feedback that I received there. So is there any kind of questions or feedback that people had on some of the feedback that we received from last week's meeting?
I mean, I think it's I mean, I mean, it's yeah, it's good feedback and it like points like interesting things. And it's also sort of like I mean, also I mean, I feel like these are all things that like we've been sort of like to some extent like addressing over time, and I mean, I think that like to some extent we're like in terms of like most businesses or organizations don't try to like encompass all these different aspects. And so it seems to me that we're a bit of ahead of the game. It really is sort of like, I think maybe like confirms to some extent like the theses that we have. Um, and just, I mean, it's also promising that like since it prompted such feedback that the fact that we've been like trying to address these things like that somebody can like read off or like sort of like pinpoint like the relevance of these things also sort of confirms that that like it's kind of like inherent in what we're doing, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, I think that was really good feedback. But also quite well covered. I have some things that I want to dig in a bit about, like what membership would entail. But I'm not sure if right now is the right time to do it because I know Christian said he's going to leave soon. So maybe that can be like part of a Q&A at the end. I don't know about the membership specifically.
Well, actually, it's a good segue. So the other part on the agenda, and we did speak about this last week, was something called the trust metric. So the trust metric is, I'm not exactly sure the entire history of the idea, but you can look it up on Wikipedia and it kind of tells you some about the computer science and what it is. But a former colleague of mine, Dan Connolly, has been using this metric for 20 years on the web as a basic sort of identity primitive, not an identity primitive, a reputation primitive. Very similar to sort of like a web of trust idea where you have some sort of seed membership, or in our case, seed membership or seed reputation. And you create pointers towards other actors in the group. And eventually over time, you can get an idea about where those trust lines are, and you can kind of categorize them into sort of low, medium, or high. In their case, they categorize them in, I think, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, or something like this. And that could be a way of defining membership, both sort of formally as a program and socially as a pointer, as an expression of trust within an individual. So I do have that part of that presentation that he created, that he shared with me, that I'd like to share with everyone here. So let's do that, and then after that, we can get into that more about what the trust metric is, what it maybe could mean to Dalten, if that's something that we want to use for membership. And Christian, if you got to go, just go ahead, jump off. You can always watch the video at the end if there's anything interesting that happens. Sound good?
Sure. I'll hang out until the cigarette's done.
Okay. All right. I will. Okay, so this is called Towards Trust Mesh. So he created this particular presentation in the context of a previous project called RChain, which both Christian and I were involved with for some period of time. I think this is the right button. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I'm starting it kind of in the middle here. So it's got a quote from Gresham's, or it's a Gresham's law that bad money drives out good. And I don't want to just read the slides here. So it's a kind of an introduction on the trust metric, and this website, Avogado, is the site that Dan launched this on in collaboration with several other folks in 1999. So this has been around for quite a long time, and this website is still around today. In fact, when he originally showed this to me a few years ago, he walked me through how I was given some basic level of reputation from his pointer, meaning he's sort of, this advanced, high trusted individual, and just that one pointer allowed me to enter the group, at least in a very minimal way, mostly read only, right? So this is sort of like an open blog where you can go and create written content. And then the sort of what this looks like in a network, right? So this is actually computationally a little bit difficult to sort of sort out all of these pointers and what they look like in a network. But this is going through some of the math that is involved in actually implementing this. And then this is sort of like the pointers, right? So they used Journeyer. I'm not sure what the middle one is, but you can see where it says Connolly has certified. Connolly as a journeyer. So I guess you can have self-referential pointers as well. And then J English certifies Connolly as master. And you get enough of these sort of metrics together, then you can have a sort of overall sort of global picture of trust lines. So this is when Dan earned his master level in 2000 of July. So he's just past 20 years. And then he's got some links to some of the implementation that and work that he's done on here. Some demos. He went into a demo, and that's probably where we'll stop. But then there's some, simulations of what these kinds of things look like. And I think these different the different colors here are the different like what does it look like when bad actors come in and give out false signals and that sort of thing, and how they get pushed towards the edges of the network. So that was one of the we would probably have less of a problem with that, mostly because we have it, making false or creating bad accounts or new accounts is more expensive in Urbit than it is on the web. So this was much more of a feature in the way this was implemented, but it would still be somewhat relevant, since especially now, since it's not that expensive to boot a new planet, or you could also boot, if we wanted to accept commits into the group as a sort of anonymous identities, then that would be one way to still preserve some sort of level of trust. So that's a very pretty short presentation about what the trust metric is. And the reason why I bring it up is because I think that because there's working code, it's been deployed for a long time. We have direct resources with the folks that actually put this together. And we could port the code, it's in Python right now, into Urbit, I think, somewhat straightforwardly, I think, and start using it right away. So that's the idea that I currently have for membership phonics. So with that kind of context, what kind of questions does that bring up, and has that changed your questions at all?
Well, no, actually, my question was less about that truster, which is very interesting, and I will look into it later. It's more about, so the most similar thing I can think of to this is like a housing co-op, right? Where the members collectively own a building, like a block of flats. It's very good because they don't have to pay rent, on top of the building management and the maintenance and so on, which is all you're paying for. Well, it's not all you're paying for, because if you're buying into a cooperative, right, you're also buying into the value of the land and the building itself. So it's actually very pricey. Like, it's hard to buy in. And if we're having collective control of the star with multi-sig stuff, I don't understand it too much, but like, I suppose 50% of the people could decide to, I don't know, liquidate the star and give people the proceeds of the sale or something like that, right? So that means then that the people who buy in, they really should be paying like a proportional fraction of the star to buy in. But stars are already quite pricey, so I wonder if people would be reluctant to pay for that. Now, have you been thinking about that at all?
Well, there's no buy-in, so that's at least nothing defined currently. And the way I envisioned buy-in is something more like participation as opposed to financial. So in terms of what are you getting as a benefit of joining something like Dalten as a cooperative, it is ownership over assets, but those assets currently, there's only one. But those assets are going to be sort of, they're not necessarily evenly distributed, but they're distributed based on actual participation in like work. So if you imagine you're in a team and that team accrues equity or some other sort of asset, it could be anything really. Some portion of that would go to the collective, and some portion of that would either stay with that team or the individual. And in that way, it's like you're buying as you're buying in support from the rest of the group. So there could be other teams that support your team. Say the legal team supports all teams, the administrative team supports all teams, that sort of thing. But the collective management of those additional assets go towards either things like cash flow, where we sell them off to actually pay for things. But that's more of the way I sort of envision this, as opposed to everybody owns all the assets. It's actually not that, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Because that's what I thought at first, that it would just be everyone has the exact, the N members, then they get it. Okay, that makes sense. So we're not buying in through money, but through labor.
Yeah, basically.
Right, that makes a lot of sense, because I think probably everyone here is like very interested in working on this project. So it probably makes more sense than using money as a way to buy in. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine, or I envision Dalten to be somewhat fractal in its sort of I don't have a better word than sovereignty or independence, something like that. So if Dalten works the way I hope it can work, that each individual is supported and has everything they need to live a thriving life, as well as the group. So it's not like one or the other, because in like a traditional company, the rewards are spread out very much towards the leadership of that particular company, and then most of the people, they get a wage, they get cash flow in exchange for that, whereas the top end, they get assets. So in that particular power dynamic, I'm not suggesting that we actually change the structure of the hierarchy, because I actually think that does work fairly well for making decisions. But the equity, or the amount of ownership people have, should be better in Dalten. But that also means that they have to come with a bit more responsibility, which is also the reason why the trust metric might be more important than just straight up who's in and who's not, because masters should be apprenticing journeymen, that sort of thing. Like there should be bonds between individuals to get them to different places of maturity. So there's co-responsibility on both types of these roles, to further grow everybody's capacity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, obviously you put a lot of thought into this, and everything you said sounds quite convincing and solid to me. So yeah, I'm definitely reassured. I don't think I have any further questions about the membership. Oh, I'll just say, is there going to be some sort of minimum bar? Like you mentioned comments. I think probably letting comments in would be a really bad idea.
Right.
Like it's just like an obvious Sybil attack, right? I can create 100 comments, like cause all sorts of problems. So Planet is quite a low bar. You also mentioned that it's like there are people like me who, if you ask for a free planet, I'll give you one. So again, it's barely a step up from a comment.
Right.
But it does show a certain level of commitment. So would you do like interviews, like vetting, or it's just interest enough?
No. In fact, what we're doing right now is something of that nature. So I guess you could consider this vetting, right? So like I keep track of who shows up, for example, right? So I know who's committed to showing up at a particular time. That tells me who's involved. I also know who speaks. I also know who writes. I know that's the thing that I'm looking for right now. And in that sense, it's a reputation metric, which is why I think trust metrics are going to be very they should be wide open at the edges, right? Even to the point of very open Web 2 forward-facing ClearNet type stuff, where people can find out about us. And that's why I put these videos up on YouTube, is so that people can see how it is we think, what we think about, and why we think it, and decide whether they want to put more energy into that. And the more you want to put energy into it, the more that reputation builds, the different responsibilities that you'll have, the different leadership positions you might qualify for. I see it as a very kind of sliding scale. But once there will be a point at which enough reputation, enough personal information is known about an individual, regardless of what their handle is, right? Nobody gets in if we don't know who you are. But once you're in, you're in. Like it's a lifelong It's a lifelong thing. That doesn't mean that it's a lifelong commitment or a lifelong participation, but it's something you can carry with you, like, you know, membership, like the fact that you lived in a city, like that doesn't ever go away. Like you can still say that you were from that place, something like that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Again, that makes a lot of sense. I think that answers all of my questions about membership.
Cool. Yeah, and I think the other side of this too, which we talk about a lot, is just that, you know, we're bootstrapping this on a new network that gives us some affordances. That's important, meaning Urbit. And we're also doing this in a particular way on the internet, which provides us a lot more flexibility, but we're going to have to be a lot more intentional about building relationships too.
Yeah, that's certainly true in my experience.
Mm-hmm. But the benefit of doing it that way is that we can put out this sort of content that we're creating, and then like-minded individuals can find that content, I mean, generally speaking. And then that way we're attracting people that want to do this kind of work together. And those are the exact kinds of people that we want to find. And we don't necessarily care where they're from.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I had. Any other questions or comments from folks that are still around? Cool. All right. Well, short meeting today. So I'll go ahead and turn off the recording now, and then I'll just stick around. And if you guys want to chat about anything else, I'm here for the next half hour. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. There's probably one or two things that I want to talk about.
Cool.